Yeah. Hello, everybody. Yeah, we still talking about classical trade theory, and now, or we started with the Ricardian model. So the maybe core explanation why, in general, we are of the opinion that it is a good idea to open your markets and to trade internationally, and of course, it's also quite obvious the model of comparative advantage is also a general argument why it is a good idea to share the work within human mankind. So the argument is not only true for two countries, the argument is, of course, also true for two persons. Remember this anecdote of Paul Samuelson. But nevertheless, there we argued from a philosophical point of view that we have only labor as input factor within the production. Of course, we can argue that this is okay because in the end we always have to work. Uh, but in general, in practice, we want to model production with different input factors. And in general, we have here a macroeconomic view on the economy. And then in general, we divide between labor and capital. And in general, now we make the distinction that within different sectors, we have, so to speak, specific input factors. So some input factors can only be used in one sector to produce. They are not mobile. You cannot just directly switch them to another sector. And in general, here within my example, I divided our economy into two sectors, an agricultural and an industrial sector. And in the agricultural sector, we can say that in general, land is the main production factor. Of course, we use also land in the industrial sector. But anyway, we, of course, do not need as much land as relatively in the agricultural sector. And of course, on the other hand, we can say that, of course, there will be industry specific capital. So some machinery could mainly only be used in one production line and not just switched to another sector. And of course, what you are doing here, you are studying, so will be you are going to be specified which in some special field. You are studying economics, so maybe later on you want to be a consultant, you want to be in the strategic department of some medium-sized company in order to give a hint which new products should be developed and something like this. And for this, you will be then the specialist, and not everybody, hopefully, can do your job. This is the idea behind what you are doing. So, in general, we talk in this case about high skilled labor. In our example, we said, we still said that labor should be mobile, and this is in general true if we look at low skilled labor, where you do not need any specific education. Um, and in general, now we distinguish that capital should be the specific factor within our example. And then we said, well, now since we have more production factors, we again have to talk about how are we producing, and there we introduced the neoclassical production function. To repeat it, in general, the two main assumptions about neoclassical production function is the positive but decreasing marginal products. So if you increase the output level, you are at a higher production level, then of course still increasing the input means increasing the output, positive, but the additional output you get out of one additional input unit will be less and less and less. And this is then this right banding positive curve which we can derive from this assumption. And the other one is that we still assume now within our two production our two input factors constant returns to scale, and this in general means that we are looking still at fully competitive markets where in the end then we have in optimum zero profits. Yeah, and then similar to the Ricardian model, we derived the transformation curve because the same is of course still true. We have opportunity costs producing one good, because here the mobile factor labor we are using in both sectors. So every worker who works in the agricultural sector cannot work in the industrial sector. So we ask ourselves of how much we have to reduce the one output if we want to increase the output level of the other product by 1 unit. And for this, then, since we have now these right-banded production functions, we obtained here now this concave transformation curve. And this means that we are not anymore in the linear case compared to the Ricardian model. And this means the exchange ratio, how much I have to reduce one good if I want to increase the other good by 1 unit, depends now on the starting production level itself. So at every possible production point here on this transformation curve, of course, we have another exchange ratio, and this exchange ratio is, of course, represented by the tangential linear line, so the slope of the transformation curve. So the slope of the transformation curve represents at every efficient production point the exchange ratio in brackets opportunity costs of the two goods. Okay, and then we started with the argumentation. Well, the two goods are still connected via the labor market. A worker working in one sector cannot work in the other sector. And for this, then we started to ask ourselves, well, how do we model these labor market? And for this, we came then to the profit maximization. And for this, we then need the marginal product of labor, and we derive for the marginal product of labor. How does it look like? And we derive from positive, but decreasing marginal products, we can derive that the function of marginal product of labor is a positive but decreasing function, like we see it here. And together with the resource restriction at the labor market, we obtained also the result that the slope of the transformation curve equals the ratio minus the ratio of the marginal products within the two sectors. And this is, yeah, similar to what you have learned in microeconomics, where you said the slope of the indifference curve is the ratio minus the ratio of the marginal utilities of the two goods, if you remember this. So compare this with um, micro economics, the slope of the indifference curve. So this is the slope of the transformation curve. And this result we need later on. Okay, but then I already said it. We have looked at the profit maximization, and there then we said, well, profits is revenue, price times the quantity of our product minus costs. And now, since we have only labor as the mobile factor, if we take the derivative of profits with respect to labor and setting this in optimum to 0, we obtain that the value of the marginal product, so price times the marginal product of labor, equals the wage. So this is then nothing else than the demand function for labor in our sector. Yep. Pardon? Well, we are doing profit maximization. Maximizing a function, the first order condition is that the first derivative has to be 0. Yeah? Okay. But we can also argue in a graphical way. Well, then let's do it. Hopefully, really hopefully, you have done this in other courses. We can say here revenue and costs depending on labor input. Now let's say our production is y of L. So this is our production function. So what have we then? The cost function is just W times L. This is a linear line going starting from the origin with the slope of W. So revenue is price times production. Production function is this right-banded curve. Right-banded curve times the price is still a right-banded curve. Yeah, I'm multiplying this just with a constant. So 3 times square root of L looks more or less the same like square root of L. Okay. So this would be then revenue. The difference between the two curves is profits. This is cost, this is revenue. So profit is the difference. Where do I find the maximum of profits? Well, when the distance between at the point where we have the largest distance between these 2 points. So maybe here. But what is the condition? How do I find this point graphically? Well, we are starting with a steeper slope than the slope of the cost function. So in the beginning, every additional worker creates, due to his productivity, more revenue than he costs. Because of course, both it is increasing. If I hire a new person, I have to pay him. But what I pay per person is always constant. This is my wage rate. Everybody is paid the same. So in the beginning, revenue is over proportionally increasing relative to my cost increase. So I'm starting to hire the first, the second, the third person, and so on. But then I have this right banded production function. So this means the additional revenue, hiring the fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on person becomes less and less and less. But the additional cost increases also always by the same amount. So then there will be mathematically one point or one guy where the additional revenue is just as large as the additional cost. And this will be the last person I will hire. Because let's say this is the seventh one. There I have an equation or equality between additional revenue and additional cost. And the eighth person then, of course, creates also additional revenue, but unfortunately, I have to pay him more. And this one will not be hired. So this is then the graphical argument that I just look at this point where the slope of my revenue function is the same as the slope of my cost function. So if the cost function is tangent to the production function. So microeconomics in 3 minutes. But this is a very general argument, and I have the hope this is that you do not only hear this argumentation in a macroeconomic course, because this is also what is behind, all optimization processes in business administration, because this is, so to speak, our model for the behavior of human beings. This is the Homo economicus concept. This is the core assumption within economics. Price equal marginal cost. It's always the same. Okay, so so we had then this optimal condition, value of the marginal product equals the wage rate. And now in equilibrium, the wages in both sectors have to be the same, since we have assumed that labor is mobile. If in one sector we pay a higher wage rate, then everybody is moving there. And then we assume fully competitive markets, the price mechanism works. And in equilibrium, we have then the same prices in both sectors. So, and this, for this to show you, we use then this graphical representation that we said, well, value of marginal product in the agricultural sector is now this decreasing function. And then this sector is connected to the industrial sector, that everybody who works in the agricultural sector cannot work in the industrial sector. So at most, we can hire L bar. We have this resource constraint, 10,000 people or something like this. Only 10,000 people can work in the agricultural sector because of the resource constraint. So at this point, if everybody works in the agricultural sector, nobody is working in the industrial sector. And then we just say, well, this will be then the origin for the industrial sector. And then we are just mirroring our argumentation that we say if the first worker is starting to work in the industrial sector, we just go to the left. For the agricultural sector, we are going to the right. For the industrial sector, we are going to the left. So we are drawing our labor demand function of the industrial sector just to the left side. Every point on these demand functions represent also, due to the optimum condition, the wage rate in our sectors. So this means where do we have in both sectors the same optimal wage rate just at the intersection of these two functions. And this is then the labor market equilibrium. And this means then this is the amount of people working in the agricultural sector, and this is the amount working in the industrial sector, and this is of course equal to L bar minus LG star. And we can derive something else which we need later on. We have derived the transformation curve. We can also now find a connection between the slope of the transformation curve and the price ratio. And the result is the slope of the transformation curve is the price ratio. And why is this true? Well, these two conditions have to hold simultaneously in both sectors. So let's just write them down. This means PG MPLG equals wage within agricultural sector, but this is the wage in equilibrium in the industrial sector. So PM times MPLM. So, and now dividing by PG and dividing by the marginal product, we just obtain PM over PG is MPLG over MPLM. And two slides before, no, only one slide. Here we had derived that the slope of the transformation curve is equal to minus the ratio of the marginal products. And here we have derived that the ratio of the marginal products is equal to the price ratio. So in the end, we obtain this result. And this, again, there you should have an aha effect, because this you have also already seen in other courses. Remember X2, X1 from microeconomics, budget line, household optimum is just where the slope of the indifference curve is equal to the slope of the budget line, and household optimum, the condition was P1 over P2 is DU2 over DU1, the ratio of the marginal utilities. So this is mathematically the same as we have here derived in production theory. Okay, and also this we will use later on. Keep this in mind. But now we want to go. We have the international trade lecture, and until now we have looked only at the situation of autarky. We are looking only at one country, and we have derived in one country the labor market equilibrium. Let's now move to a situation where we are opening up for international trade. So we are opening our borders. And let's assume that the price in the industrial sector is increasing. So the given situation should be the situation under autarky. And now we assume that PWM, the world market price in the industrial sector, should be larger than our initial price. And now hopefully you can help me. If you look at this picture, first, where do I directly find the price of the industrial sector, PM? And if this price is increasing, what happens within our diagram? Pardon? Which curve you want to shift to the red one? Okay, great. The first thing is correct. You want you have seen here we have PM, and this number is now, let's say we are starting with PM is 2, and now it should be 3, and then your argumentation, and there please be a little bit more specific. You said, well, this curve is shifting to the right. So if I copy this one, do you mean that now maybe this curve should be somewhere here? Yeah, then correct yourself. It shifts to the left because, of course, this one is increasing. And now, what do you mean by shift to the left? Right, to the left? Is it a parallel shift or is it somehow different? The internet can please also participate, and you can use your microphone. We are not that many people here. Now think of, now you have to use your mathematical skills. A function f of x, and now what is happening to this function if you're writing down the function 3 times f of x? Or the other way around, which mathematical transformation is makes a parallel shift of our function? Here in the internet, what do you mean by it should start in the origin? So the origin of the industrial sector is here. But I have an idea that maybe you mean, yeah, well, here at this point here, though, the origin of the other sector, there we have just some finite number, because remember there, this means this is just this function given, for example, 10,000 people. Well, and there maybe we can say if we have a very specific production function, it could be the case that at marginal product of labor depending on 10,000 is 0. This could be, of course, the case, but it has not to be the case in general. But nevertheless, I think you are thinking in the right direction, because what we have here is, here we have a quite low number relative to a point at this curve. And now think this is maybe 3, and let's say we have an increase of price of 2 to 3, then 2 times 3 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9, so we have an absolute increase of 3. And if we have here a level of 1,000, let's say, now times 2 and times 3 means we have an absolute increase of 1,000. So multiplying a small number with a constant, with a larger constant than before, means that we have still a slow number. So the absolute change is then in the lower part of our function, lower than in the larger part. Okay? So in general, you can say, of course, it's a shift, but it's definitely not a parallel shift, but we have a somehow upward bending curve. Yeah? So then let's say that it looks somehow like this. So the curve becomes steeper and steeper and steeper relatively to the former curve. Okay? So, and this then, all the argumentation we have made before is still true, because just only due to the new price ratio, we obtain very surprisingly a new labor market equilibrium. But how we obtain this qualitatively, this labor market equilibrium, the argumentation is still the same. Labor is totally mobile. And so we again have the cut between these two curves. Now the new labor demand curve in the industrial sector. So what we obtain, that the new wage level is increasing. Very surprisingly, since the price in the industrial sector is larger than before, we are starting to increase the production in the industrial sector. So LM star, oops, let's put it like this, LM star with the world market price will now be larger, and this will be LGW star. So in the end, what we have is that VW star is larger than V star, LWG is smaller than our starting level in the agricultural sector, LWM star is larger. And of course, inserting this in the production function means that the production level in the agricultural sector is decreasing, and the production level in the industrial sector is increasing. And now, we ask ourselves, what is now changing in the world? Not in the world, in this country, sorry. So in general, since we are starting to increase our machinery production, we more or less can then interpret is that we are starting to export. Now we are reducing our production in the agricultural sector. So here, then this, due to this price change, this will be an import sector. But now we can also ask ourselves, how are the prices relatively change? And there we can argue delta PM, the change in the industrial sector, this is just our PMW minus the starting price. And what we now see here within our graphic is due to the decreasing marginal product. So we have a falling demand curve, is that this here more or less represents the change of the price, because we are moving up here from the old curve, not from the equilibrium, be careful, but from the old curve due to this new labor labor market equilibrium. But this is the shift of the curve relative to the new equilibrium. But this here is just the change of the wage rate. So this is WW star minus the starting increase. So overall, we can say that the increase of the wage rate is less than the increase of the price in the industrial sector. And now we have an argumentation what happens within our country to the two sectors. Well, of course, we already have derived that we increase production in the industrial sector and decrease production in the agricultural sector. But now, of course, we have to ask for welfare effects, because what we want to analyze is it a good idea to open our markets or not? Well, and then we at first look at this export sector, because at a first step, we could say, well, they are happy because they can sell for higher prices because of our assumption. But then we have to argue carefully in an economic sense. Just increasing output does not mean that we are better off. Because why? If we are producing more, think again about my my microeconomics argument from profit maximization. Increasing production means also increasing inputs, means increasing costs. And then we have to look, is the increase of revenue larger than the increase of our costs? And now, at this point, then we are happy in these export sectors because of this finding here. Because why? We know that the increase of the output price, so our selling price, is larger than the increase of our cost price, the wage. So we are selling now our products for a relatively higher price compared to the increase what we have to pay to our workers. So from this argumentation, then we can say this export sector is happy because they have an income increase. So we derived also have a look at the import sector. Well, at the first point, we have not made any argumentation that they have changed the price. They are selling maybe their bread still for the same price. But due to the connection with the industrial sector and the new labor market equilibrium, they now also have to pay the larger wage rate. So there is then the argumentation that they have the increase of cost per worker, but they have no increase in output per unit. So from this argumentation, then at the first step, we have to admit the import sector is the loser. Within the import sector, total income is decreasing. So, and then we have a third group, and there we have to put both arguments together. We look at the workers. And again, I give this question to you. Are the workers happy? This would be the first observation. Well, per hour, now they are earning more. And now, please argue carefully in an economic sense. We are arguing in general that we are not only happy because we have earned more money measured in euros or US dollars, but when we can use this money for buying something and that the new basket we can buy is not increased, but if this new basket, which is valued due to our utility function, due to our preferences, if we then later on, if we compare the starting basket under autarky and now the end basket due to our own demands, due to our preferences, if we then say, well, comparing these two baskets, we are happier than before. And now, of course, it is true. Let's say per month, it's not now 3,000 euros, but 3,500. Okay. But is it also in general true? Not because cost increase, so therefore, this was from the for the production. I already have argued here for the workers. I think this was for the import sector. Oh, yeah. The internet, do you have an idea if the workers are happier? Well, of course, their nominal income has increased. But now you have to ask ourselves, what can they do with their larger, higher nominal income? They have to pay for the two goods. They can consume bread and bicycles, maybe. Yes, great. So, yeah, and now and this is exactly what we have to do. Well, now we have a higher income, and the first one is in the agricultural sector, we are still paying the same price. Okay? Because we have assumed there nothing changes. Bread is sold at home at the same price as in the world. So we can now buy more bread, but think of this condition here. The price of bicycles in the industrial sector has increased more than the increase of our wages. So we can buy less bicycles. So in general, since we have not somehow modeled the preferences, we have to admit maybe only the only assumption as in the Ricardo model that we say more is better. You know that this is not always true. Think of ice cream after the 17th bowl. We maybe can doubt that the 18th is still increasing your utility. Yeah, but in general, we make these non-saturation hypothesis that more is always better. This is the only assumption on preferences. But if nothing else is said about preferences, we have to admit workers, we don't know. Maybe there is a group who is happy because now they can they can buy more bread, so they can relatively increase their consumption of bread compared to bicycles. But maybe there are some guys as me because I'm always riding my bicycle, and then I'm not that so happy. Although per month I have more money, because with this more money I can buy, due to the higher increase of bicycle price, less bicycles. And this is what we in the end always say, well, not the nominal numbers are decisive, but the real argument. It is always about relative prices. Well, sometimes I don't. I think you have also some lectures in behavioral economics. Well, if we go then into practice, and this is called that uh, um, economic agents then in practice quite often act myopic or only short-term driven, that we just look, oh, just only the price is cheaper, or I have more money in my pocket, and because of that, I'm happy. Um, but then we, so to speak, are not acting rationally. Because in the end, what should be decisive is how much I can buy in quantity. This is always then this real argument. So let's summarize this. So to speak, the capital, think again, we are in this model of specific factors. The capital owners in the machinery sector, in the industrial sector, here, in our case, the export sector, they are better off because their revenue is increasing more than their costs, and so in total we have an income increase. In general, we can say they are better off. The capital owners in the grain sector or agricultural sector, they are losing because their revenue is decreasing and their costs are relatively increasing, so overall they have a reduction in income. They are worse off. And the maybe most complicated argumentation here, the workers in the labor market, we have to say there is ambiguity. They are ambitious. We don't know because we have not modeled in detail their preferences. There will be maybe three groups. One group says is happy. One group is maybe say no, we are worse off, and maybe there's a third group which says, well, anyway, we are indifferent. Nothing. Due to our utility level, nothing has happened. Okay, so if we would be now at the end of our argumentation, then I would be in the argument in the situation that if I'm quite angry about this guy in the Oval Office overseas, I have to admit, well, maybe he is right, because maybe his voters are sitting in this group. And if you are living in a democracy, of course, politicians are driven by the preferences of their voters. And if he now says, well, I'm caring about these losers because of international trade, then it would be quite okay that I'm starting to protect them. Okay, but we are not at the end of our argumentation. Let's, for this, now move to another perspective on our model. And now we use the transformation curve. And remember, this labor market equilibrium here, where is it? Here, this translates into the optimum condition that the slope of the transformation curve is equal to the price ratio. Because this labor market equilibrium level translates directly into an amount in the of production in the industrial sector and in the agricultural sector. Yeah. So, and let's start from a situation of autarky. So this would be then the equilibrium level given this price ratio, and this would be the equilibrium level in the agricultural sector given this price ratio. So this is depending on LM star from the labor market and this of LG star from the labor market. So, and now my question, what happens within this diagram if PM is increasing? Again, look at our curves, identify the curve where we find directly the price of the industrial sector, and then explain what happens if the price of the industrial sector is increasing. Well, if we look at this, yep, great. The orange line gets deeper because we find it here. If this number is increasing, it's a falling line, minus sign. So in the absolute value is larger. Increasing this, for example, as I said before, from 2 to 3. So we take this line and let's take a steeper one. So the optimization process, as before in the labor market view, is still the same. Now, due to the new price ratio, PMW over PG minus is the slope, has now again be equal to the slope of the transformation curve, because nothing has changed for our production possibilities. Still, the blue curve represents our production possibilities. So we obtain a new trade equilibrium. Production with trade. And this would be then this increase. So our exports of machinery and GW star, this is our decrease in the production in the agricultural sector. So, and now is, the main thing which also has changed. Well, this is the production point under autarky. If we are alone, we can only consume what we have produced. So this is then, by definition, that we are producing only for our own country. This is also our consumption point. Yeah, we are producing only for ourselves. So consumption and production coincides. But now we can say, well, in the trade situation, this point is what we are producing and what we are selling within our own country and what we are selling into the world. Because now we have open markets. So this point here represents also total income with trade. We can sell at home and we can sell abroad. What is this income? This income is, as always, price times quantity. So P M V W times M star W, what we are now producing, multiplied with the selling price, plus P G times G W star. And what is now the conceptual difference to the autarky system? Well, we cannot only sell abroad our products, we can also buy from abroad. So our production has not anymore to meet, or the quantities we have produced have not anymore to meet what we are consuming. We can also buy a bicycle from another country. And now again, think about your microeconomics course. Where do I find all possible of all consumption possibilities if this is my income line? So the same you had in microeconomics, there you had a budget. And then, given your budget and given the prices of the two goods, X1 and X2, what you have you said, where do you find the consumption possibilities? No, not on the indifference curve. What was the indifference curve? The indifference curve was the locus of all consumption baskets, which gives you give you the same utility. So this is not the consumption possibility. This was given your budget. Think of this diagram. This was your budget line. The maximum amount of X1 was M over P1, and the maximum amount of X2 was M over P2. Maybe you have also said real income. And then you said, well, every point on the budget line and below the budget line. These are all baskets which you can consume. Well, and now, of course, this point is possible for us to consume because it's lying on our new income line. But everything on the red line, on the new red income line, and below this as these are our consumption possibilities. With trade, because now our consumption point and our production point do not have to coincide anymore. So, and as we have done it qualitatively, looking at the workers, now also we have to compare these green area consumption possibilities with the starting point. Let's take a new color. And now we say, well, we ask ourselves, can we now be better off than this point? This is now the question. Well, then we can argue, given this point, is we have here this level of consumption of agricultural products. If we take this fixed and only with the assumption more is always better, then we say every basket going just to the right. Oh, this is almost the same color. And let's change this to violet. Then we are better off because we are consuming the same level of bread as before, but we buying more bicycles. The same argumentation we can say starting from the initial autarky level of industrial products and now more agricultural products, we also feel better. And then, of course, we can argue, well, if we are parallelly increasing both amounts, then, of course, due to more is always better, we are also happier. So everything in this quadrant here is the area where we would be better off than before. Area of better off baskets compared to autarky. Well, and now as a conclusion, we have the nice situation that if we look at the green area, these are our possibilities. And if we look at the violet area, this is the area where we are better off, that they are overlapping. And this is this little triangle here. So in the end, we have an argumentation, not where we are consuming, but we can conclude we have a possibility that overall our society can be better off than before. So then this possible consumption to be better off compared better off because of trade compared to autarky. So, and this is then again the fundamental argument against Mr. Trump. Because, to summarize this, now we can argue if we open our borders, of course, it is true that directly we will have a redistribution of incomes. And this means, unfortunately, there are not only winners, but there are also losers. And there is also a whole bunch of people where we have to say, we don't know. And of course, in a democracy, we do not want to look inside the heads of the people. They should decide by their own. But what we can conclude from this blue triangle now is that we have an overall increase of the consumption possibilities for the whole society, that one thing will be possible, sorry. It will be possible that we act as politicians now and we see, okay, we have there a winning sector. And now we are starting a second redistribution and say, well, we are retaking some of the additional profits of this winning sector, but not that much that they are not still better off compared to autarky. Let's say this sector has an increase in utility from a level of 5 to 10. Now we take something from them, but that they still have a utility level of 7. So they are still better off than before. And now we can take this, what we have taken from the winning sector, and redistribute this to the losers. And due to this blue triangle, we know that this is enough to lift up the utility level of every loser, so that these persons are also better off compared to the situation of autarky. So the argumentation or the argument is now not that strong as in the Ricardian model. There we said, well, specialized due to a comparative advantage, and later on trade, and then definitely everybody will better off. So you have a winning situation just due to market mechanisms. Here the argument is a little bit weaker. So trading means again we have a specialization. Remember, we are increasing in the industrial sector, we are decreasing, but we are not fully specializing. We are still producing both goods. This initiates an income redistribution with winners and losers, but there will be a redistribution mechanism, or there exists now a redistribution mechanism, so that in general by tax subsidies, everybody will be better off. Of course, we have to admit we have to do this. And if these guys have a very strong lobby, maybe they can inhibit this redistribution. Of course, these are then practical problems, but the overall argument is still true that opening your borders means that you are increasing the possibilities to be better off for everybody. Yeah. And yeah, that's it for now for the classical theory. And then We will also then look at the model where we flexibilizing also capital. And this is then the overall general equilibrium model. Okay, but that's it then for today. Thank you very much.